Hello and welcome to Enablement on Demand, using Kapal to manage data in an SQL database. In this video, we will use Kofax Kapal to store data in an SQL database. We will retrieve the data, update it, and also delete it. Now let's get started. We will use a small data set of people, where they live, and their favorite color. Notice that there are two different threads, one in Sydney and one in London. The create page action is very good for quickly entering data into a robot for testing. Set the options as you can see below, same for all pages and content type CSV. We can open the CSV for reading and loop over the rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. I created a type called person which uses name and city as part of the database key. This will handle the two different threads in the two different cities. We can populate the variable from the data, name, city, and color. Note that the red circles mean that the field is required. We will use the store in database action to store the data into the SQL server. We need to create a database mapping to our SQL server that we configured in the management console in the previous video. Kapal now wants to create the database table in the SQL server database, which is currently empty. See, we have no tables in the database. Kapal will now create the table in the database. We can now see that the table exists in the database. Everything is now ready. We can run the robot over these 4 people. We can see the 4 values in the management console in the data tab. We can also see the data in the SQL Studio, and it is here that we can see the object keys and the timestamps that are important to understand how Kapal manages data. Kapal stores the name of the robot and the execution ID of the robot that last touched the data. The timestamps tell us what the robots did with the data. Here we can see that all the timestamps have the same time as the data was created for the first time. Now let's run the robot again. We see here that the last extracted time has now been updated, but not the last updated time. This lets us know that Kapal saw all 4 of these values again, but none of them had changed from last time. This is very valuable when robots are running and seeing the same data over and over again. We can easily see if data is new, old, or has been changed. Let's make some changes. Anna has moved to Venice from Rome. Vanessa now likes red. And Fred from Sydney has completely disappeared. Notice that we have Anna twice. This is because her object key changed since the city name was part of the database key. Vanessa's favorite color has been updated to red. We can see over here, where extracted in last run is no, that Anna in Rome and Fred in Sydney were not extracted and are no longer part of our data. Let's delete these 2 old entries. We will need the 2 object keys where extracted in last run is no. We will need a new short text variable to hold the object key. Under the database actions, we see the store in database action that we've already used, and we're about to use the query database action to retrieve the object keys, and then we will use the find in database action to retrieve the variable. We can test the SQL query and see that Kapow is receiving the two object keys for the old entries. We can map the object key from the SQL query into the object key variable. When we come here, we will see there's one object key and there's the other object key. We can use these object keys to load the variable. Database, find in database, variable, object key. We now have Anna in Rome and we have Fred in Sydney. Let's just go ahead and delete them since they're old entries. Delete from database. Here we won't need to provide the object key because Kapow already has it in the person. And now the two are already gone, as we can check in the management console. Here are my top 3 tips for using Kapow and SQL data, and they come from 4 years of painful experience. Tip number 1 is, as much as you can, use Kapow itself to create and manage your SQL tables and data. Kapow is very good at working out if items have been seen and updating them and deleting them as we've seen. This will be much less effort if you let Kapow handle it than if you use your own tables and have to create all your own queries yourself. Tip number 2 is plan really well your variable types before you use them, before you create the SQL tables. Plan out well how many attributes you need and which attributes are really part of the database key. Any changes you make later can affect your robots, and especially if you've got tables already with thousands of entries in them and you realize you need new columns, you have to be very, very careful. You can usually add the columns manually in the SQL database, but be very careful and make sure you've got backups that you don't lose your data and don't desynchronize your tables with Kapow. Also, be very, very careful changing attributes in the database key. As soon as the composition of the database key changes, all of your object keys become invalid and you can end up with duplicate entries in the database, and then you'll spend a long time cleaning them up and sorting them yourself out. If you need to add attributes to the database key, I recommend creating another table with another type and migrating the variables from one system into the other so that all the object keys get updated correctly. Tip number 3 is really try and avoid your own custom object keys. A lot of people who start with SQL and Kapow at the beginning try to create their own object keys, which may be a unique integer or something that's more visually recognizable. Try and avoid doing this. Just accept the hash method that Kapow uses. Otherwise, every single time you want to process an entry in any of robot, you will again need to put this algorithm of yours in there to create these object keys. And if you make a mistake anywhere, you can break your robots as your object keys get out of sync with what you're doing. Now you know how to store, find, update and delete variables in SQL using Kapow. These are very powerful tools for managing all kinds of data in your next web or RPA robot. I hope you really enjoyed getting a closer look at using Kapow to manage data in SQL tables. Thank you.